everyone. That was a beautiful presentation, by the way. And I guess I just, just before we kick things off, I've known you for say 4 or 5 years now, and I think the first thing that I would say struck me about your work when I first saw it was that there's a sort of sharpness in how you convey reality, right? The compositions of your images tend to have a very intense closeness with reality, right? And in a way that sometimes borders on the fantastical, right? So it's like it's so real, it doesn't look kind of real in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but so I think I want to enter into our conversation using that as like an entry point because it features a lot in all of your work. All of your works are very like textured. You can see the skin, you can see the marks, you can see all the blemishes on the subjects that you photograph. And I'm just really curious as to how if that composition style is something that came about naturally, or if it's something that came about from just your, I guess, archiving process. Would you say?
Um, my main intention whenever I took like my whole interest in photography was simply representing what is real. So after taking an image, what's interesting is that I can retouch if I want to and all of that. I just choose not to because I more so care about representing simply what I'm seeing. It's not from a viewpoint of, oh, I'm archiving or anything. I just want people to see what I see. It's that simple.
That's interesting. So she said, she had told me not to ever say that's interesting ever during the conversation. And something else that I'm really curious about is what would you say was your earliest memory of fashion imagery? And I'll explain this a bit more. Growing up, I had a mom who often went to monthly meetings with her. So typically in most Igbo communities, when they move out of like their primary state of origin into a different state, they have things like meetings and communities that they have. And so every Sunday, they have uniforms, which is interesting because your friend said as well. And but then within those uniforms, which would be composed mostly of wrappers and blouses, they would find ways. The women themselves would find ways to tweak, to add accessories, to add some different styles to their blouses that differentiated them in that way. And I think for me, that was my earliest idea of fashion imagery, of people working within small ambits to create their own personalities. So I'm really curious for you to hear from you what fashion imagery looked like for you, the first ever for you.
First ever fashion imagery for me was the collection of photo albums that my parents hoarded over the years. So my dad really, really loved taking photographs or having his photographs taken. But not just that, he also enjoyed collecting images. So, when you graduate or when you're traveling, you gift, and it's so nice. It's such a lovely sentiment. You give someone an image of yourself to keep. So he had this collection of albums that really reference a lot of the images that our African greats in terms of photography are known for. Just studio photographs of people wearing their Sunday best. So those were my earliest ones. Same thing with my mom. Both of my parents were fortunate to travel quite a lot. And as you travel, you go to different places and your style changes or you add to it. So I had pretty strong, and I still do now. I collect those images and hoard them myself.
Do you have a
Yeah.
particular one that has stuck with you
And
in any of those like projects that you were looking at? The albums you're looking
the
at?
albums, there's actually one of my dad. Clearly, I'm a daddy's girl, by the way, guys. There's one of my dad on a beach wearing a full three-piece suit on a rock, balanced like that, and he's wearing his shiny shoes and everything. And that image was like, that's the image I show my friends, and they're like, your dad was cool. Why was he wearing a three-piece suit on a beach? How did he climb the rock? These are not questions, they don't need their answers. There was that. And then there's a really soft image of my mom, where I think it's also just you could tell that this is a dress that she enjoyed wearing. Just back in the day, full on shoulder pads, a belt that's up to here. It's great. It's a very simple dress, but I just remember looking at it and saying, like, wow, she looks beautiful in it. And fun fact, my mom is not a hoarder. I still have some of my father's clothes that I wear, like his pants. They don't fit him anymore. But also my mom's dresses. And these are things that are little legacies to me, where also just side notes, how well made things were back in the day.
I
So
agree.
I have a dress from my mother that's older than I am, and it's pure cotton, beautiful colors, and yeah, I still wear it to this day.
As someone who, because if you hadn't, I guess, had this masterclass, I wouldn't have, I guess, thought very deeply about your work being in close intersection with fashion. But obviously, with this conversation, I'm seeing a lot of that, right? So I'm just really curious to know, how would you say, were there any difficulties for you starting out with, I guess, translating fashion, so translating storytelling into fashion, but using photography as like the vehicle for that?
Honestly, not really. Um, I initially in this slide, I wanted to show you guys works from like actual fashion clients, but being very slightly anti. I was like, no, I'm not going to show you the works that, the audience might consider like successful. I think my main challenge has been, like I said, it's not a statement of what is, because quite transparently, these sort of images are not what's in Rage, especially when it comes to commercial, and those sort of like bright, smooth images. Some of it is changing nowadays, but a lot of my challenges were just getting clients to see that, yeah, you can do a fashion shoot from the approach of a photojournalist as documentary, and it can still carry the same weight and value that you want it to as, as an owner or as a consumer.
Yeah, and I guess especially for maybe an imagine like photographer, how would you recommend them circumventing that situation? Because obviously, oftentimes I mean, with brands, the brands sometimes will tend to be very like precise about what they want, and even sometimes being maybe pushy about
Yeah.
it, where it's like you can't tell where your perspective comes in and where their perspective, is. And so, what would you, I guess, say even helped you with convincing them to just like let me offer my perspective to this story that you're trying to create?
Create the work anyway. An example of this, I'm really bad with names of designers, forgive me. There's this shoe brand called Malone Souliers. And they're considered like a luxury shoe brand. I think they're based in London. So I did a shoot for them, and the guy was like, the creative director was very precise on like, Yagazie, this is how I want you to shoot. And I kept on having suggestions saying like, oh, well, this is not the way I photograph. And so I don't even understand why you hired me if you don't want me to photograph the way I want to. So I ended up doing both. So I took his direction, and whenever he turned away, I would end up just quickly doing what it is I wanted. And I sent him those images along with the ones that he had directed. And those were the images that he ended up using for his main store in London, because he ended up liking it. So I would say just create the work you want to do anyway, if there's time. I know sometimes some photo shoots can be quite like tightly managed, where someone is like looking over your shoulder all the time. But the other advice I would give is, besides creating the work anyway, is bearing in mind that the need for instant gratification is often overplayed. The majority of my bread and butter comes from work that I created 5, 6 years ago, that I kept as an archive. And these are works that museums collected. These are works that collectors collected. These are works that I have now sold, because times change, interests change, what people place value on changes. So create the work anyway, and then hold on to it and let go of the idea of, I created this work now, where is the recognition? Where is the money right after? The rest always follows. The one thing that I tell people all the time is do the work first and the rest will follow, rather than getting caught up in, I created this work, I need the world to see it now. Yeah.
You know, that's really interesting, but also, yeah, it is. I think I should probably get like a fine anytime I say interesting.
We should take a shot every time.
I say interesting, okay, but I like that you've talked about archiving. But I think, and I agree with that, in that is, but I'm also sort of curious, are you trying to, I guess, allude towards building a sort of like identifiable collection, or hear me out, because in my work as a journalist, I've covered different beats, right? And something that I had in mind. So the reason why I began writing or began covering stories have changed over time, but the ethos, like the primary ethos of wanting to capture things that nobody else was seeing in many ways, have always remained the same, right? So I'm wondering, is it like a thematic element when you say archiving, or is it a matter of just building a body of work that people can allude to? So are you speaking towards more of a thematic sort of like similarity? No, I'm just saying like, so are you so when you say archiving, like, so most of your works have like a thread through it, right? So are you speaking towards more of saying build works that can be identifiable, or that can be identified with you as an artist, or build works that can, I guess, help push you forward beyond just where you are as an artist? I
Yeah,
think that makes sense.
all of the above. Yeah. I would say, take for example, I have been documenting fashion in Lagos since, I think, even informally, since 2014. And in the back of my head, because I'm saving all these images, is I think in about 30 years, I can come out with a book. Because how interesting would it be 30 years in the future to reference fashion from what would then be like, what, 40, I'm bad with math, 40, 30 years ago. So it's also about things that I want people to see. We look at all our photography greats and the respect that we have for their images. Why? Because they're old. I mean, obviously, there's more to that, but there is so much interest and story and value. And I'm not talking on a monetary sense, from a monetary sense, but just from the act of saving these images. These are aspects of history, and history is always going to matter. And I think that there's always been such an appeal to looking at fashion through the ages. So when I'm archiving, I'm thinking of that, but also I'm also thinking, man, it wouldn't be bad to be like, I mean, I don't want to be that, but still, like James Barner, where it's like he was in his late 80s before he got like fully recognized, for all his work. But then he came out with, you know, this incredible like body of like massive, I can't even say body of work, massive bodies of work that people can now like reference to. These are things I'm thinking about. It's also my future. Like, what if I'm hungry in 30 years? I can also be like, you know what? Let's dig out some of these images and see what we can do with it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess, yeah, because I think that's what I was trying to figure out
Yeah.
more in that
It's both.
regard.
It's what can I keep for myself? But then also what can I give to others that people would be interested
Yeah,
in?
beyond yourself.
Yeah, because my work is not like, it's not completely altruistic. I'm also doing it for myself. Yeah.
And I think it's good that you mentioned that, because I also wanted to circle back to the idea of creating work with removed from the idea of gratification. I think it's also a very difficult thing to do now with social media, where you're seeing the lives of other people who are perhaps your age, perhaps who you maybe began with. You're seeing them getting like bigger like stuff, getting prizes and all that stuff. And I think, especially for people who are just starting to who are starting to just enter image making, what would you say is a way to find pleasure and to find comfort in the work? I believe also, I agree with you. I think the work more than anything is the most important thing. Beyond even just the work itself, being done well and being judged by your own parameter can be enough. But how would you advise, or how do you find, footing in the work and just doing the work?
I mean, obviously easier said than done, which is just like, oh, stay off social media, like it's not real. But then I've been influenced by it. You know, there was a time when I was like really, really on social media, and I'll see someone post things, and I'm like, how did they get that? It's like, why am I not there yet? You know, I'm not working hard enough. You know, all these thoughts come in, or I'm never going to get those opportunities. But the truth is, I mean, be present in the real world. What I like to do, and this once again ties back to saving your work, archiving, is imagine if there wasn't social media. Where would you put your work? Where would your work go? Sometimes, and here's the thing is that I've also built my career on social media. You know, I've been very lucky where I would say 90, I've never had to pitch, I've never had to search for a job because 98% of my work came from my online presence. You know, so there is a benefit to that. So I'm not going to say don't use social media. By all means, please use social media as a tool because in my case, a lot of editors are looking for new talent on Instagram, you know, but also think about move through the world like also at the same time like there isn't social media. Go out and meet people, talk to people. It's not just by sending them a DM and saying like, hey, I'd like find out their like events that they like to go to and go to that as well. But more than anything, it comes back down to this thing I said in terms of care. If you truly care about your work, you are going to first of all simply create it, you know. And I don't think that, you know, the sort of influence that social media has on, you know, how people feel and the sort of like the stealing of joy through like comparison, you know, it's a very real thing. But at the end of the day, the question is, are you going to stop those feelings from creating the work and the worlds that you want to exist? You know, and then the rest of it is just me being a parent where it's just like, and then if you don't create the work, I don't know what to tell you. Like,
Right. I've worked with you a couple of times,
yeah.
and something I like that you always do when we're thinking about a story or the visual element of a story is you're always asking, what does it say, right? What is the bigger picture
What does
beyond?
it
Yeah,
mean?
what does it
Yeah.
mean, right? Yeah, and it just makes me curious about what do you look for in an image or in a story that's tied to an image? What are you looking for really? That's tied to an image, right? So like a story, or no, maybe let me rephrase the question. What do you look for in a story, right? So just like I'm just really curious, and especially a story that perhaps you haven't developed yourself or that has been brought to you to work on. What do you look for? What I guess would you say is most
I
exciting
mean,
for you?
I mean, obviously, it depends on the story itself, and that's one of the main reasons that we end up working together. Is because when it comes to working outside of myself, I am not an authority on certain subject matters. So I look to work with other people that are more knowledgeable than myself. You know, I look to connect with people who are members of certain communities that I want to photograph because I don't have the right or like just always access to walk into a space and say, hey, can I photograph you? It's also a thing about respect. So a lot of the times with all the stories that come to me, my first question is who is who knows this story better than me? That's the first thing that comes to me is like, who knows this more than me? And then I am going to find the person, and then I'm going to pay the person and hire the person to help me work on the story. Yeah.
And okay,
Oh, you fought really hard for that.
we did. But I want you to talk a bit more about your experience working on the National Geographic story, just a little bit, because I think that story was so a bit of a background. So with the story, I was exploring spirituality, but tied to indigenous communities as well. And I'm wondering if the experience of working on that story revealed anything to you about yourself. And I think I'm also asking this as like a larger question as well. What also would you say has your work revealed to you about yourself on an existential level?
Honestly, with some of the images I showed you around indigenous identity with National Geographic, I don't consider it my story at all, because I am merely photographing people who are sharing with me their stories, and that's it. It is not my story, it is not my experience, but what it enlightens me with is like, oh, there are so many of us out there that think the same way, in this case, when it comes to indigenous expression, but we are just not used to using the language in terms of, talking to certain people where they are like, at core, in my core, I am a Yoruba woman, and I don't know how to explain it. Like in their core, they're a Yoruba woman, or they're just a woman that's living a certain way. And but they don't have the language to you. It's very hard to say it because then it goes into
Well,
this spiritual woo woo
yeah.
kinny
Well,
thing.
maybe they haven't had to defend their identity, so they have never had like chance to be able to like find language to quantify or articulate what that is. But have you ever worked on a story that has revealed? Because I'll give another example.
Okay.
It wasn't a story, but I think over the years, I found that what writing does for me, especially, is that it makes the world a lot clearer, but also it makes it, it gives me this insight into the fact that ultimately life is moldable, and life can be sort of structured around or molded into exactly what you want to see. And this comes from speaking to artists, speaking to other artists, writers, musicians who in their careers have molded their lives to look exactly how they want it to look, right? So I'm curious, would you say, like, in your I guess body of work and your experience, what would you say your work has revealed to you about yourself on an existential level?
First of all, Nelson, it's a lot of stories. There's a lot of stories.
Try.
Um, and it's, once again, is I really see the personal work I do here is quite separate from my photojournalism work. It's quite separate from like even my textile arts work. Um, so if anything, it just pulls me more into the worlds of other people, where I'm very grateful to have been given the opportunity through my work to just sincerely connect with people and understand them. So the closest reference, or the most recent reference, is over, once again, back to this indigenous one of, we asked Charlie Boy, what is your indigenous core? What is at your center? And he mentioned a very specific spirit in his village. And the way he described it, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And that's what I was trying to say in terms of realizing that we don't necessarily use the same language when we're trying to convey expression or like share bits about ourselves. But in this line of work that I've been doing over the years, it's just allowed me, it's hard to put my own personal experience in it, where I'm like, oh, this is how I feel about myself versus how I feel about other people. And in that case, it's allowed me to be a lot more patient. That's it. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so if you don't know, Yagazie has a very interesting. Yagazie has a very entertaining TikTok page where she where she often talks about her process, and she'll take viewers on her journey working on assignments and stuff like that. I'm curious if you can break down very briefly what an ideal process with image making looks like for you, whether it be an assignment or a personal project you're working on. What does that process typically look like?
An ideal situation would be at my home, in my home studio, not working with anybody, just working with myself. I do a lot of self-portraiture, and I think when we are by ourselves, we are most ourselves. And my process is usually I sketch my ideas beforehand. I sit with sketches for months, sometimes years, before I actually develop something, which is really, it's not a long process. It's just really procrastination, where I'm just like, it takes so not that long to
Real.
actually to actually do a photo shoot with myself, especially when I'm responsible for everything and I have all the tools at home. But I tend to actually work a lot in silence. Um, and for me, it gives me just that time to obviously sit with myself and realize that I am creating exactly what I want to exist, and I'm using myself for it. And I think for me, it's very important and it's a huge step because I have spent so many years, sharing the stories of other people. So ideally, it's me at home, usually always naked, because I do a lot of like nude self portraiture. And then at the end, I don't have AC in my house. I'm like sweating at the end of it all. And then I play music and then I do a little dance celebration. But then, you know, it's also for me because I'm so confident in that work that I also know that one way or the other, it's going to live somewhere, somehow, some way.
When do you know when your work is done? When do you know when you've have that photograph or that story like figured out?
Um, in general photography assignments, I know it's done. There's this photographer that said when you're taking photographs, especially out in an open space, I guess I'll give you three different scenarios. One would be in photojournalism, where you have this wide space around you, right? An open environment is when you think you're done taking photographs, look behind you. And usually there's always something else to photograph. And that's when I know I'm done. Now, when I'm in a more like stagnant, static space, personally, okay, need some water. Okay. When I'm in a more stagnant space, for me is I know when I have the image. I don't know if some of you guys can relate to this, where in my head I'm just like, yeah, but then I try not to be overconfident about it, and then I'm just like, okay, I tell the person because they think that I'm done. And I'm just like, just let me just do a few more. And then I tease them and say, I actually had the image like 5 minutes ago. So it's usually when I think I'm done, I take a few more rather than just calling it quits there.
Amazing. And there's something that you do both times we work together where even though I'm also even though I'm also interviewing the sources, you also speak with the sources before you photograph them. Can you? And I've always just wondered, what can you walk me through the psychology of that and why you do that?
I mean, I think it's nothing deep. I think it's just once again back to care. If you're going to photograph people, talk to them. I mean, that's it. I would say,
No, but it's like hyper common practice, though.
which is shocking to me
Yeah.
because because to me it's like it's just common sense, which is I tell people when I'm taking pictures, it's like that's 2% of the work. The rest of it is just talking to the person and making sure that they're comfortable. And that once again is it's not radical, it's necessary. You just have to care. I know we all have our goals in mind in terms of, even if it's something as simple as product shots with a model or whatever the case may be, is you simply have to care and treat people. God, it seems so common sense and baseline in terms of treat people how you would want to be treated, approach them the same way. So before I photograph people, I have a conversation with them. I think that is the very bare minimum anyone should do.
Fair. So I have two more questions for you if I let you go. You where does place come in for you? Yeah, place. Like, or more. Let me rephrase that. How has or what which places where you've lived, where you've been, have really been instrumental in like shaping your photographic like sensibility?
I would say really quickly Lagos and Liberia. Lagos because it was my first influence. I'm not from here. I moved here without knowing anybody, zero connections, and zero
Shocker.
money. But for me, I was just drawn. I was looking for home, and that's where my photography came out from. Was that I started photographing little things that reminded me of home and posting it online. And then Liberia being a much smaller country, and also the city of Monrovia being way much more smaller than Lagos, it really gave me this sort of like insulation in terms of feeling more comfortable with movement. Because when I started, Lagos was, of course, already well known for all its photographers and whatnot. It's just what deeply saturated when it comes to the visual art. So I think Liberia, quite honestly and transparently, gave me the space, to just like experiment and and also that thing of comparison, not like look and see what the next person is doing, because there weren't many of us there. Yeah.
And do you think Lagos being saturated also helped you with like having this like hyper realistic sort of, or sticking with this hyper realistic composition style? Would you say that?
No.
Okay, it was like a different thing.
No.
Okay, good. Okay, good. And then one more thing. This is a bit of an unfair question. This is last question now. A bit of an unfair question, but what do you hope that people? It could be one thing, right? But what do you hope that when someone sees an image that you've made or you've created, that they feel or that they take from it?
I can't really answer that unless it's about a specific image. I can't like dictate or like obviously I have hopes, but it depends on the image and the story around that, because they're just so many, quite honestly. But I would say with this sort of work, tying it back to what we've talked about, is that I do believe that once again is that you can create the exact sort of work that you want to exist out there in the world. Even if once again it's not this thing of instant profits or repay or you get your money back, is doing your personal work, in my case, and I've seen it with other people, has always taken myself and others the furthest, more than doing the work that you think other people wants to see.
Thank you. Those are all my questions, guys.